Hi, I'm Rowan, and if you've ever wondered what it feels like when your own family treats you like you're disposable, well, let me tell you what happened the night the storm tore the roof off my home. I showed up at my father's door with my wife and kids, soaked, scared, holding on to hope, and my brother blocked us like we were strangers. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You trash, don't step on these floors." And my father, sitting warm inside his perfect house, shouted, $10,000 per room. If you can't pay, get off my property. That's when something inside me cracked. Not anger, something colder, something final. So I made one call, just one, to the man no one knew was my godfather, the man I once pulled from the wreckage of a burning truck, now a billionaire. And when his helicopter came down on their front lawn, my family realized too late. This storm wasn't the one they should have feared. The storm started tearing at our house long before the roof gave way, but I didn't understand how bad it really was until the wind pulled the shingles up like loose paper. I'm Rowan Mercer. I'm in my mid-40s. I repair heating and cooling systems for a living, and I've spent years fixing other people's homes after storms. I never imagined standing in my own hallway, watching rain pour straight through the ceiling while my kids clung to me. Mira kept asking if the noise meant the sky was breaking. Callan pressed his hands over his ears. I told them it would pass soon, even though the walls were shaking and I could feel the pressure in my chest rising with every gust. When the roof finally peeled back, the sudden burst of cold air hit like a slap. Water drenched everything in seconds. Sarah grabbed the emergency bags we kept by the back door, but even those were damp when we tossed them into the car. I threw some blankets in, knowing they wouldn't stay warm for long, and helped the kids into their seats. The rain was still coming sideways, and the street looked more like a river than a road. Driving out of our neighborhood took twice as long as it should have. Power lines were down, and trees leaned across the asphalt. The radio kept cutting in and out, warning about flash flooding, but we didn't have anywhere else to go. My father's house was the only place close enough to reach before the roads closed. Sarah didn't say much. She was trying to keep the kids calm, rubbing their arms, whispering that everything would settle once we got somewhere safe. I nodded like I believed it. But the closer we got to my father's place in Harris County, the more something inside me tightened. I've spent years pretending the distance between us was temporary. The truth is, I was never sure there was a place for me there anymore. His house looked untouched by the storm. Lights glowing, cars lined up on the driveway like it was just another evening. My wipers pushed, sheets of rain aside as I parked near the curb. For a moment, I sat there staring at the porch light, remembering the summers when my mom used to wave me inside from that very spot. I stepped out first. The water pooled around my boots, warm from the pavement, but cooling fast. I opened the back door so Mira and Callan could hop out with Sarah right behind them. They were shivering, their clothes still damp even though we'd wrapped them in blankets. I knocked, hard enough to be heard over the rain. Nothing. I tried again. Mira tugged at my sleeve. "Dad, will Grandpa help us?" I wanted to give her the truth. Instead, I told her yes and prayed she wouldn't hear the hesitation in my voice. The lock finally clicked. The door opened only halfway, and the porch light framed someone I wished I hadn't had to see first, my older brother, Keaton. He didn't even step aside. He just leaned one shoulder against the doorframe like he was guarding a private event. His eyes slid down to the mud on my boots, then to the soaked blanket around Callan. A small grin formed, the kind that always meant trouble when we were younger. "You don't step in here," he said. "You'll ruin the floors. Stay outside." Sarah pulled the kids closer. I could hear Mira trying to steady her breathing. "Keaton," I said, keeping my voice low, "the storm destroyed our house. We just need a place to stay tonight. That's it." He didn't budge. "That's not my problem." Before I could say another word, my father's voice came from inside, sharp, loud, carrying more force than the rain around us. $10,000 per room. If he can't pay, he leaves. I froze. It wasn't just the words. It was the tone. Like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Like someone had rehearsed it. Mira's lips parted. She'd never heard her grandfather speak about me like that. I felt something inside me fold in on itself. The door stayed half open long enough for Keaton to lean forward and add, "You heard him." Then he went to close it. Not a slam, but slow, deliberate, final. Rain hit my face. It felt colder now. Sarah's breath shook as she held the kids close. For a long second, I couldn't lift my head. I just stared at the door handle, the one thing standing between my family and warmth. I used to turn that handle without thinking when I was a kid. Now I couldn't even touch it. But the world doesn't stop because someone humiliates you. I straightened my back, forced a calm I didn't feel, and told the kids we would figure things out. I wasn't sure how, but I knew standing there wasn't an option. Keaton was still smirking when he shut the door the rest of the way. The latch clicked. Something inside me changed with that sound. Not rage. Something quieter, but stronger. I reached for my phone, scrolled through contacts I hadn't looked at in years until I saw the name, Marlon Creed. The man whose life I once pulled out of a crushed vehicle on a highway shoulder. The man who told me he owed me one. I hesitated for only a moment before pressing call. He answered before the first ring finished. And when he answered, he didn't ask what happened. He only asked, "Where are you?" The moment his voice slipped through the phone, something in me steadied. I didn't repeat what he said. I just breathed once and stepped back from the door, letting the sound settle inside me before I answered him. Then I told him where we were and why we were standing outside in the rain. When the call ended, I lowered the phone slowly, trying to gather myself before I turned toward Sarah. She was already studying my face. "Who was that?" she asked, her voice soft but tense. "My godfather," I said. "Marlon Creed." Saying his name out loud felt unreal. I hadn't spoken to him in years. "He said he's coming." Her eyes widened, not in disbelief, but in careful hope. The kind you don't want the kids to hear unless it's certain. She looked over her shoulder at the car where Mira and Callan sat huddled together. "Did he ask what happened?" "No," I said. "He just told us to stay close." Sarah helped the kids settle deeper into the blankets in the back seat to keep warm. I stayed near the edge of the porch where the small awning kept the rain from hitting my face. Even then, I didn't move closer. Crossing that doorway felt like stepping somewhere I no longer belonged. Old habits have a way of sticking, especially fear. Minutes passed, the rain coming and going in uneven waves. I could hear water running through the gutters, dripping off the roofline in a constant rhythm. I kept glancing at the road, waiting for headlights that hadn't appeared yet. Sarah leaned against the car, watching me more than anything else. Then the door behind me swung open again. My father stepped out far enough for the light to hit his face, dressed in warm slippers and a heavy robe. He looked rested, collected, untouched by the chaos beating down on the rest of us. He didn't greet me. He didn't even glance at the kids in the car. "What are you still doing here?" he asked, his tone flat, like I had interrupted his evening. I tried to stay steady. We came because the roof collapsed. We just needed somewhere safe to stay for the night. He waved a hand in the air, bored already. You've always been dramatic. Everything becomes a crisis with you. The rain behind him made a curtain of sound, and yet his voice cut through it all. He lifted his chin slightly, projecting his words toward the houses nearby. I've given you more than enough chances. You never take responsibility. That's why you're standing here now. I didn't answer. It wouldn't have mattered. My father never argued to find truth. He argued to win the room, even if the room was only his front porch. Keaton stepped outside next, leaning against the doorframe as if he owned the place. You remember when he quit college because he said it was too hard? He said to my father. Folks still bring that up. I stared at him, stunned at how easily he twisted something so painful. I left because I had to work after Mom passed, I said, evenly. Someone had to keep the lights on. Keaton shrugged like I was rewriting history. My father made a sound halfway between a sigh and a laugh, like my explanation was childish. I saw Mira watching from inside the car, her small face tight with confusion, and I knew this moment would leave a mark. Sarah stepped toward them. Garrison, the kids are freezing. We're asking for one night. My father didn't even pause. Their comfort isn't my responsibility. And if you two built your life without a safety net, that's not something I need to fix. Sarah stiffened, swallowing whatever she wanted to say. I could feel the shame radiating off her, and it burned through me in a way the cold rain never could. I looked at the two men standing on the porch, warm and dry, judging us from a place of comfort they never earned. That was when I felt the last thread inside me snap, not loudly, not with any fight, but in a quiet, final way. I turned toward the car, moving slowly so the kids wouldn't sense the shift in me. Sarah followed, placing a gentle hand on my arm when we reached the passenger door. What now? She whispered. We wait, I said. Right here. Help is on the way. The rain eased for the first time since we arrived. The wind calmed, almost like the storm had burned itself out. But inside me, something different was forming. A kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I saw my father's house for what it really was, a place I kept trying to return to out of habit, not love. I put my hand on the car roof, grounding myself as the night settled into a heavy quiet. The kids were curled together, their eyes half closed. Sarah stood beside me, trusting my judgment even when I felt uncertain. Then, just as I started to breathe a little easier, the air shifted. A vibration rolled through the yard, faint at first, then steady, unmistakable. And then, in the distance, I heard a low thumping sound, steady, mechanical, impossible to mistake. The thumping deepened until it felt like the air itself was pulsing. I turned toward the sound just as a shape began to push through the thinning clouds, lights cutting across the yard. For a moment, everything around us seemed to pause. The rain, the voices, even the trembling in my hands, as the sight came into focus above the rooftops. A helicopter was descending, its spotlight sweeping across the wet lawn. The blades churned the air so fiercely that water lifted from the driveway in a mist. Leaves spiraled off the trees, scattering across the street. Curtains moved in several windows nearby. Doors cracked open. People stepped onto their porches, shielding their faces, trying to figure out why a helicopter was landing in our neighborhood this late at night. Keaton stepped off the porch, shouting over the escalating noise, "What is this? Who does that?" He looked around as though someone nearby might explain it to him. My father came out behind him, still in his robe, holding the fabric closed with one hand. For the first time all evening, he didn't look confident. He squinted at the aircraft, then at me, trying to connect dots he'd never considered before. Sarah drew closer, her voice low. "Rowan, is that him?" I nodded. Even so, the scale of the moment didn't fully register until the helicopter lowered enough to ripple the puddles under our feet. It touched down right on my father's lawn, flattening the grass in a swirling circle. Dirt kicked up. The mailbox rattled like it might come loose. Keaton yelled, "You're tearing up the yard! Cut that thing off!" His outrage sounded small under the roar. The side door slid open. A tall figure stepped down into the wash of lights and wind. He wore a gray suit, darker at the shoulders where the mist clung to him. His posture was straight, every step grounded and sure, like he had walked through storms far worse. Even from a distance, his presence carried weight. Marlon Creed. People in this county knew that name. They knew his face, even if they had never met him. Energy, real estate, infrastructure. If there was a major project in Texas, his name usually circled somewhere around it. The blades began to slow. The noise softened in stages until it became a steady hum. Marlon walked toward us with a focus that cut through everything else. My father moved forward, pasting a polite smile on his face. "Mr. Creed," he called out, lifting his voice. "Welcome. What brings you here tonight?" Marlon didn't even glance at him. He walked past my father as if he hadn't spoken at all, as if the man standing in a robe on his front porch was just decoration. Keaton moved aside on instinct, confusion etched across his face. Marlon stopped in front of me and placed a hand on my shoulder. His eyes softened slightly. "You should have reached out earlier, son." The word hit the air like a strike. My father froze. Keaton blinked hard like he needed to reset what he just heard. Porch lights from the neighboring homes glowed brighter as more people leaned in closer, trying to catch the meaning. "Godson," he said, "Godson." I felt the weight of the moment settle into my chest. Deep, steady, undeniable. The night suddenly seemed quieter, even with the helicopter still cooling behind him. Memories from years earlier flooded back. The overturned SUV, the smoke curling out of the engine, Marlon pinned under the dashboard, me pulling him out while flames crept along the doorframe, the hospital, the promise he made after he recovered. "You ever need me, you call." I never did, not until the roof came off my house and my family was turned away like strangers. Marlon looked past me at Sarah and the kids. "You're all safe now," he said gently. "I've got you." Then he turned his attention to the two men on the porch. His expression shifted, calm, analytical, not threatening, just controlled. My father cleared his throat, trying to regain footing. "So, you're saying Rowan is your godson? That's unexpected." Marlon nodded once. "I've been in his life longer than you have." The silence that followed pressed down on the whole yard. Two men from the helicopter stepped out carrying blankets and small emergency kits. They approached quietly, waiting for Marlon's signal. He looked at me again. "Rowan, is this where you hope to stay tonight?" It wasn't just a question. It was permission, and everyone knew it. Before I could respond, Keaton stepped forward, voice rising, desperate. "This is our house. You can't just walk in here and act like—" Marlon lifted a hand slightly. Not a threat, just a reminder of who had the authority in the moment. Keaton went silent immediately. My father tried a different tone, lighter, almost nervous. We didn't know the connection you two still had. If we had known, we would have... Marlon interrupted him without raising his voice. If you had known, you would have treated him better. Every word landed with a clarity that cut deeper than shouting ever could. I felt something shift inside me. A small but unmistakable lift in my chest. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the outsider in my own family story. We just need somewhere to stay until morning, I said. That's all. Marlon nodded. You have that. And more. He turned slowly toward my father. The porch light hit his profile, outlining the seriousness in his expression. And then he said 3 words that drained the color from my father's face. Marlon turned toward my father and delivered those 3 quiet words that drained every bit of color from his face. The moment hung in the air, too heavy to ignore. And before anyone could scramble for an excuse, he added something even firmer, motioning toward the doorway. His tone wasn't forceful, but it carried enough certainty to make refusing impossible. Let's go inside, he said. It wasn't a suggestion. My father hesitated first, glancing at the porch like it might shield him. Keaton stared at his shoes, jaw tightening. After a long breath, both stepped aside, opening space for us. It felt strange crossing that threshold after years of being told to fetch tools or fix something. Tonight, I entered because someone who actually valued me insisted on it. Sarah guided the kids in. Their shoes squeaked against the clean hardwood as they clung to her coat. I followed, and Marlon stayed just behind me, bringing a quiet sense of protection that settled around us like armor. Warm air hit my face the moment we stepped inside. It carried the scent of cinnamon and roasted ham, the kind of comfort you expect from a family dinner. The contrast twisted something inside me. While our house sat open to the sky, soaked and torn apart, this place looked untouched, safe, perfect, like a home meant for someone else. My father closed the door and forced a polite smile. Make yourselves comfortable. We all knew he didn't mean it. I took in the living room slowly. The shelves were arranged carefully. Framed photos, sports trophies, certificates lined up in neat rows. They had worked on these displays recently. The dust patterns showed that much. My eyes moved across the wall automatically, expecting to see something from my own childhood. There wasn't a single thing. No baseball photo, no science fair certificate, nothing from high school graduation, not one sign I ever lived here. It felt like standing in a museum curated to pretend I never existed. Sarah noticed the same absence. Her expression tightened with sadness before she turned back toward the kids, trying not to let them see. Marlon studied the wall with a calm that told me he understood more than he let on. His jaw tensed slightly. My father cleared his throat. We've been reorganizing, trying to tidy up the... You erased me, I said. My voice came out even, no anger, just truth. Keaton let out a small laugh, smug and sharp. It's not erasing. We're focusing on the real foundations of this family. Dad and me. He gestured proudly at the wall behind him. These show what mattered. The people who stayed. The ones who built something. The cruelty sounded practiced, like a line he'd delivered before. The kids stiffened, Mira inching closer to Sarah. A cold realization settled in me. They hadn't changed tonight. They'd been like this for years. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. Marlon stepped forward slightly. Interesting decor choices, Garrison. Most parents keep all their children visible. My father straightened. We chose to highlight milestones, that's all. I recognize milestones, Marlon said. This is revision. The room went still. My father's eyes darted toward the dining room, and for a moment he looked older, smaller, as if the shape he'd held onto for years was slipping. He motioned stiffly. Let's sit down. Talk like adults. As if the last hour hadn't happened. As if he hadn't priced us out of shelter. As if he wasn't standing in a warm house while my children had been shaking outside in the rain. We moved to the dining room. The table sat under a hanging light, polished and lined with place settings from a dinner they'd clearly abandoned only minutes earlier. My father gestured for seats, but Marlon subtly guided me toward one near the center. He took the head of the table without asking. The shift in arrangement was silent but unmistakable. My father's eyes flicked toward the chair he usually commanded. Sarah sat beside me. The kids curled in quietly on her other side. Keaton took the seat directly across from me, shoulders square, expression tight. He hated every second of this. His eyes followed every move I made, burning with a resentment he didn't bother to mask. Marlon rested his hands on the table. Rowan decides how this conversation goes. Hearing that grounded me. For the first time in this house, I didn't feel like an intruder. My father cleared his throat again. Well, if we're all here, maybe we can be honest about... Before he finished, Keaton leaned forward. His eyes narrowed, voice low and sharp, aimed straight at me with the precision of someone who'd been waiting years to strike. And he said something that made Sarah gasp and pushed Marlon up from his chair. The words hung in the air like broken glass. Keaton leaned in, eyes narrow, and dropped a sentence sharp enough to slice the room open. It took a moment for my ears to even accept what he'd said. Sarah's breath hitched beside me, and Marlon pushed up from his chair as though he might stop the next blow before it landed. "Tell them what you really did," Keaton said. "Tell them why Mom died." For a few seconds, everything inside the house went still. The hum of the fridge faded into nothing. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. I felt my throat tighten. My hands went cold. Sarah whispered, "What is he talking about?" Her voice trembled, not from doubt in me, but from fear of what they were trying to unload. I looked at Keaton. He wore a satisfied expression, like he had been saving this moment for years. "You didn't tell them you begged her to come get you," he said. "You didn't wait for Dad like she asked. You pushed her to drive that night." The room tilted slightly. I felt myself sliding into a memory I had spent years trying to breathe through. I was 17, standing in the parking lot behind my job with my jacket pulled tight around me. I'd called her because I didn't want to walk home in the dark. She came without hesitation, smiling when she pulled up. She never complained about the drive, never made me feel like a burden. She chose that back road herself. She said it was peaceful. But guilt, old, familiar, corrosive, crept in anyway. My father folded his arms and stared at me, waiting. "Well," he said softly, almost inviting me to admit to a crime I never committed. Sarah's hand brushed my arm. "Rowan, is any of that true?" I forced out the truth, even as the old shame pressed down on my chest. She wasn't supposed to take the back route. She did that because she liked the quiet. I didn't ask her to do that. I just asked for a ride so I wouldn't be walking home alone. Keaton shook his head, smirking. "You're still rewriting the story. You always do." Something inside me cracked. My palms hit the table. Not from anger, but from grief so heavy it made my arms shake. I bowed my head, trying to breathe through the weight of it. Marlon stepped closer, resting a hand on my shoulder. "Slow down," he said quietly. "Tell the truth, not their version. Yours." I managed to steady my voice. Mom died because a drunk driver ran a red light. That's what the officer wrote. They told us that night. I didn't cause it. Marlon turned to my father. Is that accurate? My father stiffened and his gaze slid away. That movement alone told me everything I needed to know. Marlon didn't wait for an answer. Where's the report? He asked, tone calm but unforgiving. If you've brought this up for years, it should be somewhere visible. Garrison hesitated. Keaton tried to speak, but he stumbled over the first word. One of Marlon's security men stepped forward. He had been looking around earlier, quietly observing the cabinets along the hallway. In his hands now was a thin folder. He placed it gently on the table in front of Marlon. My chest tightened. I didn't recognize the folder, but something about it felt familiar, like a ghost tapping on an old bruise. Marlon opened it. The original accident report lay inside, untouched. The officer had written it clearly. Mother struck by drunk driver who ran a red light. Not at fault. I swallowed hard as the truth cut through years of fog. And then another document slipped loose, clipped behind the report. A counseling referral. Not for me. For Keaton. My head lifted sharply. Sarah covered her mouth. The kids stared, confused and scared. My father's face drained of color. Marlon slid the paper forward. Looks like there was someone who struggled after the accident. But it wasn't Rowan. Keaton's jaw snapped shut. His eyes darted from the document to my father, silently pleading for backup. Marlon read from the report again, voice steady. She took the back road because she didn't want to be late picking up her son. She told the officer she was hurrying. There's no mention of blame. None. Keaton mumbled, "This is out of context." Marlon cut him off. "The only context is that you two weaponized a tragedy to keep him small." Garrison slammed his hand on the table. "She shouldn't have been out there. If he hadn't asked." "She was his mother," Marlon said sharply. "Parents go when their children need them. That's what love looks like. Something both of you seem to have forgotten." His words hung in the air, heavy as judgment. I felt everything inside me unravel. Years of guilt, years of letting them mold my identity through their pain. I gripped the report, the paper trembling in my hands. My voice finally broke free. "You let me believe I caused her death," I said. "You let me carry that. You used it every time I made a mistake, every time something went wrong, and you knew the truth." My father looked away. Keaton swallowed hard, but he didn't deny it. The silence between them was confirmation enough. Sarah wrapped her arms around me. "They punished you with a lie," she whispered. I lowered my head into my hands, grieving not just the accident, but the years they stole from me with their silence. And then Marlon placed the folder closer to me and said, "Rowan, there's more you need to see. Something they hid even deeper." Marlon's voice still echoed in my head as he reached deeper into that worn folder. I could feel everyone's eyes following his hands, waiting, bracing. The air felt thick, like the whole house was holding its breath. I straightened in my chair, already sensing this was bigger than the accident report, bigger than guilt, bigger than the years they'd twisted around my neck like a rope. He drew out a second sheet. The paper looked older, the edges soft and yellowed, handled many times but never shown to me. He glanced at it, then looked at me with a seriousness that made the room tilt. "Before your mother passed," he said, steady and controlled, "she filed something important, something meant for you." My pulse stumbled. Sarah's hand tightened around mine. Across the table, Keaton shifted, tapping his fingers nervously against the wood. My father's foot tapped faster, a rhythm of panic he couldn't hide. Marlon unfolded the document carefully, almost reverently. It felt wrong that a stranger treated it with more respect than my own blood. "This," he said, his voice low, "names you, Rowan, as beneficiary to 30% of the Mercer property, effective when you turned 18. The words barely made sense to me at first. 30%. Of the house I wasn't allowed to step into without being insulted. Of the land my father always claimed was Keaton's birthright. Of properties I helped repair as a teenager while Keaton sat in air-conditioned rooms planning his future." Sarah gasped. Even the kids stiffened, though they didn't fully understand. My eyes scanned the page, trying to absorb it, but the numbers blurred for a moment. I felt something inside me fold. Shock mixing with a deep ache I didn't recognize until that moment. "My mother left that for me?" I whispered. Keaton exploded before anyone could respond. No way, that's not real. Dad never agreed to that." Marlon lifted his gaze slowly. "It is notarized. It is signed by your mother. It is legally binding." Silence locked the room in place. My father stared hard at the table. His jaw twitched. His shoulders sagged, not in sadness, but in irritation, like the truth was an inconvenience. Marlon flipped to the next page. "And there's more." My heart dropped. This sheet wasn't old. The paper was crisp, the ink dark and sharp. A form transferring that inheritance, my inheritance, away from me and to Keaton. A voluntary forfeiture, signed by me. Except I had never seen it before tonight. My voice came out small, foreign. "I didn't sign that." Marlon's tone hardened. "This signature is not yours. It doesn't match anything you've signed as an adult." Sarah drew in a trembling breath. "They forged it," she whispered. "They forged it and hid it." My father shoved his chair back and stood, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. "He wasn't ready," he snapped. "He'd have wasted it. He had no sense of responsibility. Keaton was the one who stayed, who worked, who took what wasn't his," I said, cutting him off, my voice brittle but strong enough to stand on its own. Keaton's face reddened. "Dad did what he had to. You wouldn't have known what to do with that kind of responsibility." I rose automatically, my body responding faster than my mind could catch up. The chair skidded behind me. My hands hit the table, but this time it wasn't grief holding me down. It was fury. "You let me believe I was worthless," I said, each word shaking. "You let me take the dirtiest jobs, scrape by, break my back fixing other people's homes, while you stole what my mother meant for me." My father pointed a trembling finger at me. "You always needed structure. This family would have fallen apart if you'd had any authority." "This family fell apart the moment Mom died," I said, "and you made sure I took the blame." He flinched, not from guilt, but from being cornered. Marlon stepped closer, placing the documents on the table one by one, like pieces of evidence at a trial. His voice dropped into something cold, something dangerous. "Fraud, forgery, interference with estate directives. You've crossed every legal boundary, Garrison." My father's face lost what little color remained. Keaton tried to jump in. "He didn't mean, this isn't. Rowan wouldn't drag us into court. He wouldn't do that." Marlon turned toward him slowly. "I wouldn't." He pointed at me. "But he might." The room shuddered. Not from thunder, the storm outside had mostly passed, but from the sheer pressure inside these walls. And then my father's voice cracked open, weak and trembling, the bravado finally collapsing. "Rowan, Please don't destroy us." My father's whisper hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. I kept staring at him, trying to understand how the man who spent years telling me to toughen up now stood there trembling like he'd lost all control. And the longer I looked, the more I realized what had shaken him. He wasn't worried about courtrooms or cops. He was terrified that the mask he'd worn for decades was finally slipping. Sarah stood beside me, her hand warm against my arm. My kids were sitting on the steps near the hallway, too quiet for their age. I gave them a small nod, letting them stay where they were. They deserved to witness the people who claimed to love them. The storm outside had eased, leaving only a faint patter on the windows. Inside, the silence felt heavy, almost suffocating. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. "What truth scares you that much, Dad?" He didn't answer. He just whispered the same plea again, barely audible. "Don't destroy us, Rowan." Before I could speak, Keaton stepped forward. His whole posture screamed frustration. Sweat dotted his forehead, and he kept rubbing his palms together as if trying to work off the pressure closing in around him. "That inheritance was a mistake," he said. "Mom wasn't thinking clearly when she signed it. Dad fixed it. He fixed everything you would have messed up." Marlon straightened, blocking him with a single step. "Keaton, you are inches away from admitting to a federal crime. Choose your next sentence carefully." Keaton let out a short laugh, but there was fear under it. He wasn't used to someone bigger than his ego standing in front of him. His eyes bounced from Marlon to me, then back to Dad. That's when he snapped. "You think this is about paperwork?" he spit out. "We were going to take his land anyway. That storm was perfect. He wouldn't be able to afford repairs. He'd lose the place, and we'd grab it before the bank listed it." The room froze. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to go still. I turned toward him slowly. "You plan to use the storm to take my home?" Keaton lifted his chin as if his confession was some noble truth. "You were going to fall apart sooner or later. We just prepared for it." Sarah covered her mouth. My kids leaned closer together. I felt something inside me shift. Heavier than anger, deeper than shock. It was the feeling of seeing someone's soul with all the lights turned on, and realizing it was darker than you ever admitted to yourself. Marlon's security man stepped forward with a phone in his hand. "There's something else you need to hear." He tapped play. My father's voice filled the room, captured from some dinner conversation I clearly wasn't invited to. "Rowan? He's barely holding his life together. His house is a heartbeat from collapsing. A storm will take it eventually. You'll see. He always crawls back." Then Keaton's laugh echoed through the recording. "When that place finally caves in, we'll get the land. He'll have nowhere else to go." Sarah shut her eyes. My kids stared as if learning the language of betrayal for the first time. My chest tightened, and it felt like someone pressed a hot iron against my ribs. I turned to Dad. "That's how you talked about me? About the kids?" He looked away. No apology, no explanation. That was the moment something inside me came loose. Not in a broken way, but in the way a chain snaps after holding weight too long. I finally saw them without excuses or childhood memories getting in the way. "I'm done chasing your approval," I said quietly. "And I'm done being the punchline in this house." Keaton let out a small scoff. "Don't act like you have any power here." I didn't react to him. Instead, I looked at the fire burning behind my father. The flames cracked softly, the only gentle sound in the room. "I don't need power," I said. I need the truth. Marlon stepped forward and faced my father fully. You begged him not to destroy your family, but you broke it long before tonight. Every lie, every manipulation, every story you twisted for your own benefit. This is the fallout. Keaton tried to recover some ground. Rowan won't press charges. He doesn't have the backbone. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, he seemed small. Just a man who'd never faced consequences for anything. I survived what happened to my house, I said softly. I'll survive this too. Keaton froze when Marlon shifted toward him. His eyes flicked downward, realizing the bluff wasn't working anymore. Marlon leaned close to me. Be ready. They're desperate now. When people like this feel cornered, they strike. And I nodded, because I felt it too. The tension, the tightening air, the threat forming behind my father's silence. I didn't have to wait long. Dad straightened slowly, shoulders squared as if bracing himself for a blow he planned to deliver instead. Then he looked me straight in the eyes, voice cold, steady, almost rehearsed. If you pursue this, I'll make sure you lose everything. The words I feared he might say but hoped I'd never hear slid out of him like poison. I felt them settle in the room, heavy, cold, final. And as that silence folded in around us, I knew exactly why I'd felt the shift in the air a moment earlier. I'd been right. My father was about to use the cruelest weapon he had. He squared his shoulders and stared into me with a hardness that didn't come from age or exhaustion, but from a lifetime of control. That look alone could have pushed the younger version of me to apologize, to shrink, to take the blame for something I didn't do. But not tonight. Behind me, Sarah gripped my arm, trying not to let her fear show. My kids pressed close together on the stairs, watching a man they thought they knew transform into someone they'd never met. What does that mean? I asked. He lifted his hand, pointing it at me as if I were a trespasser in his home. You want to expose me? Fine, but understand this. I can pick up a phone and make one call that rips your life apart. I blinked, unable to believe what I was hearing. He continued, voice shaking with a fury he could no longer hide. I'll call CPS about your house. It's damaged, unsafe, easy case. They'll take the kids until an inspection clears. And the city, I'll make sure your property gets flagged as hazardous. You won't be able to fix anything without permits that'll take months. You'll default. You'll lose the land. Sarah gasped like she had been slapped. My son whispered, barely audible, Grandpa, why would you say that? Garrison didn't even look at him. If you insist on dragging this family through the mud, I'll show you real consequences. The threat landed like a blow to the side of my head. For a moment, the room tilted. Not because I feared CPS or losing the house or the city inspector, but because this was the first time he weaponized my children, against me. That line he crossed didn't lead back anywhere. You'd hurt them to punish me? I asked. His answer came without hesitation. If that's what it takes. Something inside me tightened, then stilled, not broken, anchored, like a storm's center forming inside my chest. A quiet, steady calm that didn't come from fear, but from finally seeing the truth without excuses. Beside me, Marlon shifted, closing some of the distance between us. His presence didn't overpower mine. It steadied it. Before I could speak, Keaton stepped in, voice rising with panic. Dad, stop. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. Rowan isn't worth losing everything over. I turned my eyes to him slowly, and he flinched. Not worth it? I repeated. That's not what I meant, he muttered, although the look in his eyes said exactly that. You've been a burden your whole life. Dad's carried this family. You'd be nowhere without him. Sarah stepped forward, voice shaking with anger. You think standing around collecting whatever your father hands you is carrying the family? My husband built everything he has with hard work. He doesn't steal. He doesn't forge signatures. He doesn't rewrite history to make himself feel bigger. Keaton sneered at her, sharp, belittling, but before he could say another word, Marlon moved between them. Keaton stumbled backward, startled by how fast he'd been cut off. Marlon lifted a hand, not to threaten, but to shut the entire room down. Enough. His security guard approached and handed him a slim black folder. Marlon tapped it once against his palm, expression cold and precise. Then he turned to my father. You threatened government agencies. You threatened to manipulate CPS. You threatened to sabotage your son's home. That alone is enough for several investigations. He paused, but we're far past that point. He opened the folder, revealing documents I had never seen. Earlier tonight, he said, I filed for emergency legal protections for Rowan and his family, temporary custody protections, documentation safeguarding his children from false reports, and a fraud complaint tied directly to the forged inheritance transfer. Keaton's voice cracked. You can't do that. I already did, Marlon replied. Garrison's face drained. His arms lowered like the weight of the room was pressing down on him. For the first time, he looked less like a fierce patriarch and more like a man cornered by his own lies. Marlon continued, calm but sharp. You forged your son's signature. You hid his inheritance. You tried to weaponize a natural disaster. You spent years breaking him down emotionally, and tonight you threatened his children. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're not afraid of losing the family. You're afraid of losing control. The fireplace crackled softly behind him. The sound felt too warm for a moment this cold. I stood straighter, feeling something inside me shift into place, like I'd finally stepped into a role I should have held long ago. My whole life, I said quietly, I tried to earn something from you. Respect, kindness, maybe love. But tonight, you showed me exactly what that love looks like. Garrison opened his mouth, but nothing came out. And I'm done accepting it, I said. Marlon put a hand on my shoulder, steady and supportive, without overshadowing me. I looked at my father. You're the one who's losing everything, not me. Keaton tried to speak, but his voice dissolved somewhere in his throat. Then, just as the room settled into a stunned silence, the front gate alarm chimed sharply. A bright sweep of light passed across the windows. Another helicopter. And it was coming in low. The alarm kept ringing, sharp and insistent, while the lights from outside swept across the windows like a lighthouse beam. For a moment, no one moved. Not Marlon, not Sarah, not even my kids. The whole house felt like it was holding its breath. Marlon exhaled slowly. Good, he murmured. He's here. The floor trembled. Dust shook loose from the corners. The curtains fluttered wildly as the helicopter descended into the front yard. The blades chopped the air with a force that felt almost alive, rattling picture frames on the walls and making the glass in the windows hum. Keaton stumbled backward, nearly falling over the rug. My father gripped the arm of his chair as if bracing for impact. For the first time all night, fear, not anger, took over his face. Sierra leaned in close. Rowan, is that really him? I nodded, steadying my kids as they pressed into my sides. Yeah, I said quietly. It's him. The front door burst open under the pressure of the storm of wind, and through the doorway stepped a figure I recognized instantly. Tall, disciplined, moving with the kind of purpose that comes from decades of command. My godfather, Titus Vale. He didn't rush. He didn't posture. He simply walked inside with 2 security officers behind him, the wind pushing at his coat as if it knew better than to get in his way. Garrison tried to stand straight, but his voice trembled. "You can't just enter my house?" Titus didn't even look at him. He looked at me first. "Rowan," he said, "you holding up?" And for the first time in too many years, I could answer honestly. "Yeah," I said softly. "I'm all right." He gave a single nod, simple but full of meaning, before turning his attention to my father. The air seemed to tighten. "You threatened his children," Titus said. "His children." My father opened his mouth, but his voice cracked. "It wasn't what it sounded like." "It was exactly what it sounded like," Titus replied. "And we're done pretending otherwise." He stepped farther into the living room, setting a heavy folder down on the coffee table. Its pages spread slightly, revealing documents I'd never seen. Inside lay everything: the real inheritance papers, my mother's handwritten instructions, the forged signatures, the financial transfers, the timeline of every lie. Titus opened each one with the calm of a surgeon revealing the truth layer by layer. "Your mother left the land to Rowan," Titus said evenly. "All of it. You were meant to manage it until he was grown. Instead, you diverted it to your favored son. You buried her wishes. You buried him." Garrison's face went so pale I thought he might faint. Keaton's expression flickered through confusion, indignation, and something that looked like guilt, but not enough to matter. Sarah squeezed my arm. My kids watched in stunned quiet, and something inside me, some old knot I'd carried since I was 17, finally began to loosen. Then Titus turned toward me. The entire house felt silent, waiting. He placed a hand on my shoulder, firm and steady. "You're coming home," he said. 3 words, soft, final, like a door opening after decades of being locked. My throat tightened. Sarah's eyes filled. My kids climbed closer, as if the words had reached them too. Keaton broke first. "You can't take him. He's not. Titus didn't let him finish. "He's my godson, and I take care of my own." My father sank deeper into his chair, as if gravity itself had doubled, and Titus, with absolute calm, motioned to his attorney. More papers were handed over, formal charges, fraud, coercion, property interference, intent to endanger minors. Garrison didn't argue. He couldn't. He just stared down at the floor, shoulders shaking slightly, the weight of his own actions finally settling where it belonged. I gathered my kids. Sarah stood with me. The house felt smaller suddenly, like a place I had outgrown long before tonight. I looked at my father one last time. "I forgive you," I said quietly, "but forgiveness doesn't mean I stay." He raised his eyes, but whatever he wanted to say never found its way out. We stepped outside. The night air felt cool and clean against my face, like the world itself was letting me breathe again. Titus guided us toward the helicopter. The blades roared to life, lifting loose leaves and bits of debris from the yard. Sarah held my hand as the kids climbed in. Titus followed, steady and sure. As the helicopter rose, I looked down at the house, my childhood home growing smaller beneath us. Not disappearing, just fading. There are storms you survive, and storms you walk away from. Tonight, somehow, I did both.